Hey, in this lesson, we are looking at JavaScript timers, and what timers do is they allow you to run a block of code when you want to run the block of code. So you can set when that block of code gets run. So there are set timeout, which sets a timer which executes a function or specified piece of code once the timer expires. There's also interval, so set interval, which is slightly different because this will repeatedly call a function or a block of code with a fixed time delay between each call. So it returns an interval ID, which can as well be tied back to it, and you can remove it at a later point. So you can set the timeout, and then you can also set the interval, and then you can remove the interval when you want to remove it. And there's some examples here on what the difference between the two are. So we've got different timers here. So the timeout, the interval, and request animation frame, which we are also going to be looking at. There's an example of setting the interval. So that's the one that we were looking at, and this gives us the option to set that interval of code to run. Let me show you within the editor, and we'll try these out. So first, setting an interval ID, and this is a window object, so grabbing it by the window, and you don't always need to include the window, as you probably already know from you working with window objects. So we've got a callback, and we can run this at 500, and then we can send in a parameter into that function. Set up the callback function, take in the message. So for this instance, it's going to show interval, and we'll just console log out the contents of message. And then also, let's set up another variable, and this one is going to be for the timeout. So we can see the difference between the two. And again, window, and we're setting a timeout, and this one is going to be different because this is going to execute callback. And even though we're setting it to 500, it's going to continuously execute this. I'll show you what the difference is. It's going to be very clear once we run this. So once we save it, you can see that interval ran the first time, then set timeout ran, and then timeout stopped. So it only ran at the one time, but you see interval keeps going. Stop the interval, and you can do a clear interval, and then you just need to specify interval ID. As soon as we do clear interval, we see that the interval stops incrementing. It's no longer running. I'm going to create a function here to stop the interval, and it's just a clear interval, and then whatever the interval ID is, that's going to clear that out. So now we've got a function that we can run, and we can stop the interval anytime we want. And all that does is clear the interval. There's one other one that I want to show you, and this is one that I used quite a bit, I have to admit, and this is request animation frame. So what this does is it creates an animation frame, tells the browser that you wish to perform an animation, to create that animation before the next repaint. A lot of times this will be used within Canvas, but you can use it outside of Canvas as well, where we've got the request animation frame, and they've got a nice example here where we're setting up the animation frame, we're making the request to the animation frame, and then we're checking to see what the values are, and if progress is less than 2000, then we request the animation frame again step, and that will run this function over and over again until this is met, and once progress is no longer less than 2000, it's going to stop running, so it's not going to run anymore. Let me show you how this one works within the browser. We're set a variable value of x to 0, and we need to select our element, and using document query selector, selecting the div. I'm also going to apply some style properties to this div, and also do a height and a style of background color. So that gives us that element that we can see it now. Let's apply the animation frame. So create a function, call it step. Within this function, we're going to increment x by 1. And then we're taking that element and applying a style property to it. And the style property that we're applying is transform. Same translate x. And the value of the translate x will be whatever the value of x is. And then break that back into the string. So it's expecting a string value here. And then adding in the condition while x is less than 450. Then we're going to run this. And then using window animation frame, where we're going to call it to step. And then one last one to start this off. So watch what happens to the red box once I place this. We see that it's going to continue to move until the value of x is greater than or equal to 450. And once it is, then it's going to stop moving. So that's all done through the CSS update. We're using translate to move the element. So this is another way to use animation frame to create animations. And as you see, it's a nice smooth transition. There is a challenge for you in this lesson, of course, and that's to create a countdown timer that decreases by each second until it reaches 0 output the value to an element. So it's going to start out at 10 and it's going to decrease using the interval. And then once the value has decreased to 0, we're going to clear the interval and stop the countdown timer. So go ahead and set this up and I'll walk you through it. You can pause the video here and I'll walk you through the solution coming up. So let's go ahead and walk through the solution where we've selected the element over here. I'm going to just move this up to the top and reorder the coding so that we can use that same one where we're selecting the element. In this case, I'll use value of y. So this is where our countdown is going to start. The interval timer, and set that up using the window object and create a function called counter. And we're going to run it every 100 milliseconds. And then we'll change it to a second afterward. So just as we're testing it out. So create the function. And within the function, we're taking the element, state its text content to equal whatever the value of y is. Subtract from y. Got a condition. Looking to see if y is less than 0. And if it is, then clear the interval. And the interval is this one here. So we see the countdown went really quickly. Let's update that. Now the countdown's a little bit slower. Of course, we can update the size of the font, more visible. So let's update font size. So now we can see our countdown. So we got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and our countdown is complete. Have some fun with it. Try it out for yourself, and we'll see you in the next one.